Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Armando Urban, member of education team at the International Testing Agency. Welcome to the IF webinar series. This is the first in a series of 3 sessions brought to you by the ITA in conjunction with your international federation. Today, we will cover athletes' rights and responsibilities, anti-doping rule violations, consequence of doping, and proactive reporting. Before we go any further, I want to make sure that everyone is aware of the different simultaneous translation options. So please, on your Zoom menu, you will see a button called Interpretation. We are delivering this session in English with simultaneous translation available in Arabic, French, Chinese, Russian, and Spanish. And please note that all languages are being recorded for future reference. You can also use automated translation captions by selecting a supported language from the captions box in your Zoom menu. Just keep in mind that these captions are generated from the original English audio, so in case of any discrepancies, the meaning and spirit of the English version will prevail. So a very warm welcome to all of you and a big thank you to everyone who is joining us today from the many sports that you can see on your screen. These sessions are a true collaboration between all the partners involved, and we're really glad to have you here with us today. So thank you so much for being here and for your time. As for all of our sessions, we encourage debate, we encourage also interaction and questions. And we trust that you will join us in the spirit of fairness, respect, and integrity. So to get the most out of this webinar series, we'll answer your questions on the topics covered in this session live at the end, and you can write them using the Q&A box. We'll also run some poll questions to bring the athlete's voice into the conversation. And of course, while everyone is joining and settling in, you can use the chat function, and I would like to actually know your sport, your role. Please let us know if you are an athlete, if you are an administrator, if you're representing a specific country. So I will look at the chat very, very quickly. So welcome to our friends from Iceland. Thanks for being here, everyone. Nice to have you with us, Spain. Wonderful to see you in the chat of Paraguay, India, Tunisia, and I see so many from Algeria, Brazil, United States, bienvenidos Peru, Mexico, Iraq, Ukraine, Pakistan, and so many, many more. So thank you so much for being here with us today. So now let's start by introducing the ITA. Well, the ITA is an independent organization that offers anti-doping services to international federations, major event organizers, and other organizations requesting support. Of course, always with the goal to protect the integrity of sport and athletes all over the world. The ITA has then partnered with your international federation to deliver this webinar series for you. So now, Benjamin Cohen, the ITA Director General, would like to offer all of you a warm welcome. Let's hear from him now.
Hello everyone and welcome to this ITA webinar. My name is Benjamin Cohen and I'm the Director General of the International Testing Agency. I'm very glad that you are here today to learn more about anti-doping. Your role in supporting fair sport, clean sport is extremely important. So I wish to thank you for that on behalf of the ITA, and I hope that you will find the sessions interesting.
Okay, so this series consists of 3 sessions where we will cover all the topics set out in the WADA code. These webinars are designed to guide, educate, and of course, inform you, helping you stay on the top of your anti-doping responsibilities. You can join all 3 live sessions using the Zoom link that you already received, or you can also access the recordings and the PDF slides afterwards in the ITA IF Webinar Series Toolkit. Now, we're also pleased to offer an IF Webinar Series certificate to anyone who joins a live session or watches the recordings in the toolkit, and of course, passes the IF webinar series test. The IF webinar series handbook also provides more information on how to get your certificate. We'll share the link in the chat in a few moments so you can actually access the handbook directly. So the learning objectives of today are for you to, well, first of all, to understand athletes' anti-doping rights and responsibilities. Then to understand the principle of strict liability. Next, to learn about the 11 anti-doping rule violations, why they exist and who they apply to. After that, to know the consequences of doping. Then we also look at the role and importance of proactive reporting. And finally, to know where to go for more information and who to ask for help. At the end of the session, we will be delighted to welcome Gianluca Siracusano, ITA Head of Regulatory Compliance, who will join us to answer your questions live on today's topics. So let's start with athletes' anti-doping rights and responsibilities. So when we talk about athlete rights in anti-doping, it's important to highlight the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act, was developed by WADA's Athletes Committee. This document, this act was created to give athletes a clear and consistent understanding of their rights within the global anti-doping system. So to better understand this document, it helps to, of course, first look at what is the role of WADA. So the World Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA, is the global regulator for anti-doping. Then WADA is responsible for the World Anti-Doping Code, which harmonizes anti-doping policies, rules, and regulations across sports organizations worldwide. The code then is supported by different 8 international standards. Now, going back to the Athletes Anti-Doping Rights Act, then this document ensures that athletes' rights are clearly defined, they are accessible and universally applicable. This directs athletes to different relevant sections in the code and the different international standards for more information. Now, it is also important to know that the Act is made up of 2 different parts. Part 1 outlines 14 rights included in the code and the international standards. And part number 2 lists recommended athlete rights for best practices, which are not found in the code or in the different international standards. But now, it's important to remember that while these rights are written for athletes, everyone in the anti-doping system has a responsibility to know them, to understand them, and of course, to promote this. So the first athlete right is equality of opportunity. This means that athletes have the right equal chances in the pursuit of sport to perform at the highest levels in both training and competition. So in other words, clean athletes have the right to compete against other clean athletes. Now, if you go to right number 2, it is equitable and fair testing programs. This means that all athletes in all countries must be tested in line with the code and international standards, ensuring that the testing is consistent and, of course, following the standards and fair for everyone. The next right is medical treatment and the protection of health. And this one is actually twofold. First, athletes have the right to be free from any pressure that jeopardizes their health through doping. And second, athletes have the right to a therapeutic use exemption. And we will talk more about this later in the series. Now, if we move to right number 4, this is right to justice. This is right to a fair hearing with a fair and independent hearing panel and a timely decision. Please note that also if on appeal, the athlete has the right to be represented by counsel, although at their own expense. Next is right to accountability. Any anti-doping organization that has jurisdiction over an athlete has to be accountable for their actions or omissions. And athletes have the right to report compliance issues. Now, let's move to whistleblower rights, access to anonymous or confidential mechanisms to report any potential or actual doping behavior. For example, you can report via the ITA's Reveal platform. Next up, we have right to receive education and information from anti-doping organizations, such as what we are doing here today. Importantly, right to data protection. A lot of sensitive athlete data is collected, and this right refers specifically to athletes' right to the protection of privacy and personal information. Right number one is right to compensation. This means that an athlete has a right to pursue damages from another athlete or person. This could be particularly relevant if we think about medal reallocation or prize money. Moving on to protected person rights. Well, it refers mainly to minors in the code, but a full definition is available in the document's appendix. Number 11 is rights during sample collection. We'll go over this in detail in week 3 during the session on testing. And right to be sample analysis. Well, in case of an adverse analytical finding, the athlete can request to have their B sample analyzed. And finally, point 13 of the Act states that athletes' other rights and freedoms should not be affected. Then right 14, it's more of a housekeeping item that describes application and standing as it relates to the code and international standards. Now, we have covered the athlete's rights. So now let's look at athlete responsibilities, as these are, of course, also extremely important. So let's check this now. So athletes have a responsibility to first know and follow the rules. Second, to not work with anyone acting as athletes or personnel who is serving a sanction for an anti-doping rule violation or a criminal conviction related to doping. You must also take full responsibility for what you ingest and anything that you use. And this relates to the principle of strict liability that we will cover later today. And in addition, to inform an anti-doping organization who your athlete support personnel are if asked. You're also required to inform your international federation or your national anti-doping organization if you have committed an anti-doping violation within the previous 10 years. Another important responsibility is to inform medical personnel of your obligations as an athlete, especially if you are prescribed any medications or any different treatments. You must also be available for sample collection when requested, both in competition and out of competition. And finally, cooperate with anti-doping organizations and your sport federation. And of course, athlete support personnel and others have an obligation to inform and remind their athletes of their different responsibilities. In this series, we will make sure that you have the information and support to fulfill your anti-doping responsibilities. Now, related to an athlete responsibilities to take full responsibility for what you ingest and use, well, you need to know that anti-doping is based on the principle of strict liability. This means that an athlete is solely responsible for everything they use and that is found in their body, regardless of whether there was an intention to cheat or not, or if the athlete is at fault. It is never an excuse for an athlete to say, oh, well, I didn't know, or the doctor gave it to me. No, you as an athlete, you will face the consequences. So This is one of the main reasons it is so important for you as athletes to know and to understand your anti-doping responsibilities, and that you are empowered to protect your integrity, to protect your sport, and to protect your legacy. So you as athlete, or probably athlete support personnel, you have a responsibility to know and to follow the anti-doping rules. And quite simple, of course, if you don't know what they are, it might be hard to, of course, stay within the rules. So these rules are found in the World Anti-Doping Code and are adopted by international federations and national anti-doping organizations, and therefore apply worldwide to every athlete and support person. So you then might be wondering then, well, what is doping? Well, doping is defined when an anti-doping rule violation or ADRV occurs. So what if we do then a poll to see if you know how many anti-doping rule violations there are? So the options are 1, 5, 7, or 11. And I can see so many responses coming in. So thank you so much for your participation and for engaging with us. Let's wait for a couple of more seconds to see, to get more responses. All right, let's close the poll and let's share the results with our attendees. So the answer is actually 70% of you got this right. Yes, there are 11 anti-doping rule violations. On your screen, you can see the 11 anti-doping rule violations, which are found in the code articles 2.1 to 2.11. Importantly, well, a rule violation is much more than a positive test. So we will explain what each of these ADRVs mean. And please know that all 11 ADRVs apply to athletes, and ADRVs 5 to 11 also apply to athlete support personnel. Now, the category of athlete support personnel includes coaches, includes team managers, team medical staff, and others who works with the athletes. All right. So as mentioned, the first 4 ADRVs apply only to athletes. So Article 2.1 of the World Anti-Doping Code is the most commonly known ADRV. And this is the presence of a prohibited substance in an athlete sample. So in simple terms, is a positive test. ADRV 2.2 is use or attempted use of a prohibited substance or method. An athlete might use or attempt to use a prohibited substance or method, probably not get caught by the testing program. But if there is enough evidence, they can still be sanctioned. Now, importantly to know is that evidence can include probably number 1, admissions, can also include witness statements, documentary evidence, or data or other analytical information. As an example, analytical information can be obtained through the athlete biological passport. So moving on, there are 2 other ADRVs which apply to athletes only, and these relate to conduct during testing. ADRV 2.3 occurs if an athlete refuses or fails to submit to testing. If an athlete avoids being tested, the sanction for this can be just as serious as an athlete testing positive for a prohibited substance. ADRV 2.4 is whereabouts failures. This ADRV concerns athletes who are in a registered testing pool. These athletes have specific obligations to provide their whereabouts information to an anti-doping organization about where they are going to be at specific times, so testing can take place with no advance notice. So now let's look at the rest of the ADRVs now, which are applicable to both athletes and athlete support personnel. and these are 2.5, tampering or attempted tampering, which means interfering with doping control or including the prosecution of a case. 2.6 is then possessing a prohibited substance. 2.7 is trafficking or attempted trafficking. This means handling, transporting, or selling prohibited substances. 2.8, administration or attempted administration. This means giving or attempting to give an athlete a prohibited substance. 2.9, it's complicity, means involvement in any ADRV in any way. 2.10, prohibited association, working in sports capacity with anyone currently banned from sport. And 2.11, discouraging or retaliating against reporting doping in sport. A reminder, please to use the Q&A for any questions that you may have about ADRVs or anything that we have just mentioned today. So, despite the clear sport rules are in place and the fact that doping really does not align with the dreams athletes have when they first start out sports, well, we know that some athletes still choose a different road. So often as a result of decisions made during vulnerable moments or in times when their careers are in a vulnerable moment. So we know that doping is not straightforward. Rarely is any decision to dope clear and easy. It is also affected by our environment and the different situations around the athlete. We know also that decision-making scenarios are really complex and can often be related to vulnerability moments. And of course, this can lead to justifying doping behaviors. So to better understand examples of vulnerable moments and the consequence of doping, we're going to watch 2 short clips from the US Anti-Doping Agency. And of course, I would like to thank them for allowing us to share these videos. These clips are athlete testimonials. This means athletes who decided to dope and later spoke up about their experiences. The first one is from Julia Stepanova, a track and field athlete, and the second one is from Tyler Hamilton, a cyclist and former Tour de France rider. In both stories, they describe the moment they made the decision to dope. And as we watch, I want to remind everyone watching these videos of the courage these athletes showed in speaking publicly about their different experiences. So both face a significant, actually negative attention, not only for their decision to dope, but also for the decision to speak up afterwards. So I kindly ask that you please keep your comments respectful to these athletes and their experiences. Let's watch these videos now.
And I'd finished a stage race in southern Spain, like a week-long stage race. And I was just like a starfish on my bed, collapsed. And I remember one of the team doctors came in into my room. And he was praising me about how well I had done, how much I had kind of pushed through the pain, and how impressed he was, but that I had to start taking care of my body and living a little bit more professionally, as he called it. And yeah, he was wearing like this fly fishing vest, and he reached into one of the pockets and pulled out this little red egg-shaped capsule. And he said to me, he said, "Tyler, this is for your health. It's not doping, it's for your health." It was it had testosterone in it. And yeah, that was the moment. He handed me this capsule, and that was the moment. I knew most of my teammates were doping at the time. And I thought if I said no to it, then I wouldn't be selected to ride in the Tour de France. So in a way, like the doctor coming into my room, offering me this little red egg-shaped testosterone pill, in a way that was almost introducing me to the A team, you know. And for me, I felt like that was a big opportunity to that was my chance to, ride in the tour. And it showed that they had faith in me and that they thought I had a future in the sport.
When I was 20 years old, I was sick and I spent 3 months in hospital. And I wanted to continue to run, but doctor said it's better for me to stop running because my body needs to have power to kind of fight with this sickness. But I wanted to continue to run because I like it. And my coach asked my doctor about using some prohibited substances. And doctor said, yes, probably it should help. And I just was learning from other athletes, from my coach. And they was talking about doping like it's like a normal way to prepare. It's like vitamins for athletes. And they like explained me all adults, athletes, they use it. Like we cannot run without this. And after that, my coach decided to start giving me prohibited substances.
Right, welcome back. Well, there are many consequences of doping, and these consequences are not just a result of an athlete being caught. Today, I will not go through all of them. You can see written on the screen one by one, but rather we will continue to listen to athlete stories. Now, before we hear from the athletes, I want to mention the sanctions for doping from the perspective of the anti-doping rules. Firstly, an athlete's competition results can be disqualified. If the results are disqualified, then they will have to return medals and prizes and will lose any points. The athlete or other person will serve a period of ineligibility, which means they cannot compete, be involved in sport-related activities, or receive funding for the duration of their sanction, which of course can be up to a lifetime. An athlete or other person might serve a provisional suspension, which means they cannot compete or participate in sport-related activities until a final decision on the consequences is made. There might be also financial consequences, including fines and recovery of costs related to the anti-doping rule violation. Also, information about the ADRV will be made public, except if the athlete is a minor or in exceptional circumstances. There also might be consequences if the athlete is in a team sport. These specific consequences then can be found in each team sport's anti-doping rules. So these consequences are determined during the results management process, which takes into account many different factors. This means that, today we cannot present the exact sanctions in a session like ours, but beyond sanctions and rules, it's also important to look at the personal impact of doping. So now let's hear from Julia about how doping affected her physical health.
It was in 2012 years, and it was one accident. I was injured, and my coach offered me to do some infusions with creatinol phosphate and midocalm. And I did it, and few seconds after, when it was done, my heart started to beat rapidly, and I was scared that I can die. And after that, I was questioning. And that moment when it happened, I was just kind of lay down and just told myself, if I will be alive, I will never again just put any needles in my body, just take anything in my body, because I don't want to die.
All right, well, it is important to understand that substances or methods are on the prohibited list not just because they enhance sports performance, but also because they might represent an actual or potential risk to the athlete's health. And that is what we saw from both Julia and Tyler. Now, what is even more important is that doping is often done in secrecy and often by those who do not have the qualifications or knowledge required to keep the athlete safe. So, in addition to administering drugs that are already harmful to the athlete's health, this is often done in unsanitary conditions, or I would say probably in grown doses or without proper monitoring or follow up on the athlete's health. So, when it comes to the consequences of doping, mental health is just as important as physical health. And that's what we will see from our next clip of Tyler. Let's play the video.
Cycling all of a sudden became different. It was more about results. I felt more like a number. The numbers that I produced on the bike, you have all this data that you can record while you're cycling. Those numbers became kind of like whether I was happy or not. After the 2003 season, which was probably my most successful season, on record, had great results, had a big Tour de France. I got back stateside after the season was over. It was in my off season, and I just realized I was having a hard time just getting out of bed. And, no motivation. I thought about suicide. I drank to just check out at some points. Pretty much every night, if not every night, at least every other night, I'd wake up usually between 2 and 3 in the morning and just sit there for 45 minutes and stare at the ceiling. Yeah, I called them committee meetings, and just kind of think about what I was up to and the consequences, and if it all went bad, how ugly that was going to look.
Very, very, very real words from Tyler talking about the mental health impacts of doping. I would like to cover some other long-term effects for the athlete and others. And then, a final video from Julia who explains some of the long-term effects that she has experienced. Let's play the video.
When I was banned, it was like last row. And after that, I decided, okay, I need to do something right now. And I need not listen anymore people around me and just don't believe them because they like me. I believe them, and they don't care about me. They don't care about my health. I have like 20 times more ferritin, and they don't care. They care only about results, about money, and about medals. I can say if you cheat, you would never be a real champion, because with all your life, very deep inside of you, you will be feeling like you're a cheater, not a real champion.
Doping can also have a significant impact on an athlete's family. So to show some of these effects, we have included quotes from a WADA report called Operation Refugee. This report, produced by WADA's Intelligence and Investigation Department, examines cases of doping on minors, that is, athletes under the age of 18. So here are two quotes from the WADA report. The first quote says, "My child had just obtained a scholarship to study abroad and could lose everything." They were stigmatized by other athletes and other parents who spread rumors saying that they must have been doping for years and that I, as a parent, I was responsible. The second quote, then, "My child phoned me to tell me they had tested positive. I was on the street when I heard the news. I started to cry. I have lost members of my family, but When I compare that experience to this, I can say that the moment I learned the news about my child's positive test was the worst moment of my life. All right, well, wrapping up and summing up, when it comes to the consequences of doping, then there's still so much that we don't know. We don't know how many years it might take for the physical and mental effects to actually reverse, or whether some of the damage is permanent. We don't know how deeply an athlete's relationships will be affected, or how this will impact other different areas of their life. Also, we don't know the full impact on fellow athletes, the ones we don't hear about, who didn't make the team or the team championships and who might have retired early. And ultimately, well, we don't know what doping will do to the future of our sports. So let's play the final video about speaking out from Tyler.
And I didn't want to tell the truth. I really didn't. I thought, I felt like I was 10 years too late to tell the truth. But being forced to go in and testify in front of the grand jury, it was like, I felt like that all of a sudden was my moment. And it was like I had all this like guilt like built up that I didn't even know how deep it went. And then finally I got there in front of the grand jury. Maybe the first 10 or 15 minutes it was a little bit hard, but then it was just like, and it just came out, and it felt, for as hard as it felt also just wonderful. And here we go. Here's the truth. And it's not pretty. It's really ugly. I'm ashamed about it. I'm going to disappoint a lot of people with this information, but it's the truth. And it was at that moment I was like, wow, I've been like protecting this culture, this omerta, trying to be like the good old fraternity mate, like not telling the secrets. And then I realized, wow, what is just a ugly situation this has been, and ugly situation we all went through. So from that moment on, really, being in that Los Angeles courtroom, I came out of there and I kind of had a new perspective on what I was going to do with my life, and hiding the truth was not included in that anymore.
These last words from Tyler about hiding the truth not being an option anymore are a good actual transition to our next topic, proactive reporting. So alongside following the rules yourself, your role as an athlete or athlete support person is to report what you know about doping in sport. And of course, proactive reporting supports clean sport. Anyone involved in or witness to sports, including athletes, coaches, medical personnel, and other athlete support persons, parents and entourage, sports officials and spectators can report their doping concerns. Any information related to doping in the past or in the present and or any future intentions should be reported. Information might be about any involved in sports, including athletes, coaches, medical personnel, and other athlete support persons, and of course, even officials. Not only the obvious things of concern, such as a direct observation or discussion of confirmed doping, should be reported, but all information, no matter how big or how small, what you might consider small, such as an unusual performance or suspicious behavior, might be actually the piece that brings a big puzzle together or starts an investigation on the right path. So there are two ways that you can use the ITA reveal reporting platform. You can use the online web version. You can also send an anonymous WhatsApp message or an anonymous email. All platforms are totally secure, and your personal details and the information that you share are strictly considered confidential. Whether you choose to provide identifying or your contact details or remain fully anonymous when you report, then you can then engage in a two-way communication with the ITA Intelligence and Investigations team. Importantly, words and communication can be in any language. So in this slide, you can see the different links to the reporting options. And you might wonder, well, how email or WhatsApp is then anonymous? Well, these services are provided through a third-party software, which actually strips all identifying details, such as email addresses, phone numbers, account name, and different IP addresses. Of course, always to ensure your anonymity. So please know that at the core of the ITA's intelligence and investigations is the integrity of those who report their doping concerns. The ITA has several safeguards in place to protect the identity of anyone who reports. The ITA INI team are highly trained and experienced in handling confidential information and working with reporters. You can trust that they have your best interests in mind and the skills to manage your concerns appropriately. Now, when the team receives any kind of information, it is reviewed alongside other data. Now, the overall situation is then analyzed and the potential impacts are then assessed before any action is decided. Importantly, the protection of a reporter is paramount, and the team, of course, has strict measures in place to ensure confidentiality when actioning any reports. Important to know that a common concern about proactive reporting is the fear of unintentionally harming someone's career if they are innocent. The ITA does not take action unless there is sufficient evidence to support any allegations. Credible information then is required to pursue anti-doping regulation against anyone. So, in summary, then you should now, understand the athlete rights and responsibilities in anti-doping. Probably you also now understand the 11 anti-doping rule regulations that apply to athletes and the ones that apply to athlete support personnel and any other members of the sport community. You must also know, that there are many wide-ranging consequences of doping. Understand proactive reporting and that this is key for clean sport. Again, you can report anything that you see, that you hear, that you know or suspect confidentially and in an anonymous way if you wish. All right, well, I believe it's let's now time to move into the live Q&A. And at this point, I would like to invite Gianluca to join me as well for this part of the session. Again, thank you, Gianluca, and thank you to everyone who's been engaging in the chat, in the Q&A box, submitting comments, submitting any questions. I believe that we have some great questions coming in, really thoughtful, and exactly the kind of discussions that we want to have today, especially that we have Gianluca. So Gianluca, I will go with the first question if you're happy with that, and then I will hand it over straight to you to deliver any thoughts, any comments. So
Yes,
first of
thank you,
all,
Armando.
thank you, Gianluca, and thank you for everyone who submitted questions. The first question is actually, a great one from Nadika. And the question says, as a Taekwondo athlete, I would like to ask, why aren't there laws or systems in place to better protect athletes by regulating supplements in a way that guarantees that we won't accidentally face doping violations? We're constantly reminded by doctors and the national anti-doping organizations that responsibility is on us. But for professional athletes, it is nearly impossible to meet all these necessary nutritional requirements through diet and recovery alone. Then supplements are essential. Well, first of all, thank you so much for your question and thank you for your thoughtful summary. We will actually touch on supplements on session number 2. So it will be great if we can address this question next week. But before I do that, I will just check with Gianluca. Gianluca, would you like to add anything about Nadika's question?
Yes, sure. First of all, welcome everyone, and thanks for joining us today in this important webinar. Yeah, I think it's a very good question. So I'm happy to maybe share a few thoughts. And then, as Armando mentioned, I also strongly encourage all of you to join the second episode of this webinar series, which we really talk almost exclusively about supplements. But it's a very good question. And so I'll start by saying that, in fact, us behind the scenes, working in the system, we are doing our best actually to avoid what's mentioned in the question, namely having athletes that are caught for inadvertent doping, or even worse, having cases of contamination. Now, that said, it is true that the starting base, and that's why it's so important, and we repeat this principle in all our webinars, the starting point is that athletes are responsible for what's found in their body. This is a very strict but also very important rule upon which the entire anti-doping system and the entire fair sport competition is based. So starting from that perspective, it is very important that athletes are made aware, are fully conscious of what they are ingesting, including with supplements. Now, I will not spend too many details since, as I said, there will be a second session on this. But what's important to know is that, unfortunately, the regulations around the world around the manufacturing of supplements is not the same, for instance, compared to medications. When we go and buy medications, we can be sure that they are not contaminated. There cannot be any prohibited substance in there. Unfortunately, it's not the same with supplements because these are just products that can be produced by anyone. Even just a commercial entity can produce them. Therefore, it's very important to be extremely cautious and careful with using supplements. What's very important, and that will be my last message because you will hear more about it in the next session, is that there are certain producers that guarantee that those supplements are free of any prohibited substance. There are certain initiatives taken by NADOs, by other organizations, whereby certain supplements are tested and therefore they can be considered safe to use by an athlete. But I'll stop there, and I really invite you to join the following session for more information on this.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Gianluca, for your feedback, and always great to have your input. Nadika, please make sure to join us again for session number 2. We will be diving even deeper into these topics, especially around supplements. So please make sure to join the next session. All right, well, let's take the next one coming in from the Q&A box. And the question is from Joanna Halip. Is current medication for personal use as a member of the athletes team consider an ADRV? What do you think about this one, Gianluca?
Yeah, it's also a very good question. Thanks for it. So it's important to note that, of course, athlete support personnel and specifically medical support personnel, they are entitled, they may have a need to actually carry with them a prohibited substance because this may become necessary to treat an athlete, for example, during an emergency situation. So, of course, the first scenario is if the medication doesn't contain a substance that is on a prohibited list, there is even no question about it. And our experience working in big events is that most of the medications that are brought by medical support personnel, they are free of any prohibited substance. Then, of course, if instead we're talking about a medication containing a prohibited substance, so if it's an athlete, our recommendation is always make sure that you carry it with the valid therapeutic use exemption that you need to have in order to use a prohibited substance. So it's important that an athlete possessing a prohibited substance with them, or a medication including a prohibited substance, has also the TUI certification attesting that they are authorized to use that substance. That's very important. For medical support personnel, it's a bit different. Of course, they are more entitled to carry a prohibited substance or legal justification as to why they have such substances with them.
Thanks, Gianluca. I really appreciate your input on that. Now, this next question is really interesting one. It touches on something that we actually often get asked about in all different education webinars. And the question is, well, is the intention of doping sanction more or less severe than the action itself? What do you think about this one, Gianluca?
Well, it's a very good question, almost a philosophical one. I would go back to the code and mention that. So, as a general principle, the conducts that are prohibited under the code are conducts that require either an action or an omission, of course. So, as a general principle, the intention itself only is not something that is sanctioned. However, it's very important to note that the code is very clear, for example, about the fact that for certain violations, even the attempt to conduct the violation, so the attempt to do a certain behavior, is sufficient to constitute an anti-doping rule violation. This means that, for example, if we talk about the administration of a prohibited substance, as we have heard from Armando before, one of the 11 anti-doping rule violation, even just the attempted administration of a prohibited substance is considered an anti-doping rule violation. This means that even just the fact of potentially trying to commit an anti-doping rule violation can be an anti-doping rule violation itself. So this to say that in certain situations, trying to commit an anti-doping rule violation, even without getting to the successful result, meaning that the violation was brought to the conclusion or the behavior was brought to the conclusion, it's not necessary as a threshold to constitute an anti-doping rule violation. And the last point that I will mention there is, since I see the word intention in the question, it's not necessarily in the scope of the question, I believe, but it's important to remark that violations that are considered intentional, meaning that there is a direct, strong intention from an athlete to commit an anti-doping rule violation, they are subject to higher sanctions compared to violations that instead are committed with just a lower degree of fault.
Thank you once again, Gianluca. I really appreciate your insight on that. Now, the next question takes us into another important area. It's about what happens when someone provides a false report about another athlete. So what if we take this question from Safia? And the question is, does ITA take action against someone who gives a false report about another athlete?
A very, very good question as well. Yes, I will be clear on this. We've had some cases that were prosecuted for athletes or other athlete support personnel providing false information. So this is a possibility. In all our whistleblowing tools, we have been hearing about Reveal. We have a policy. We always advise anyone that wants to submit to read the policy. And in there, it's also mentioned that providing false information may lead to some disciplinary consequences. This can be different. Of course, if we are saying something false about someone else, there could be a recourse for, let's say, civil lawsuit, meaning that the other person can bring a case for defamation against the person that has declared something false. But from an anti-doping perspective, also, we could decide to prosecute the case under the anti-doping rule violation of tampering. Tampering means tampering with any part of the doping control process. So this could also very much be not just, tampering with the sample itself, but it could be tampering with the process of investigation of an anti-doping rule violation, or tampering with the results management process, or tampering with any other anti-doping activity. So long story short, the answer is yes, there could be disciplinary sanctions for an athlete that provide false report about another athlete or another person.
Thanks for that, Gianluca. Real clear and I would say really well explained. We appreciate the way that you break things down so practically. Now, we have another question about the testing process and sample collection. Actually, that's a great topic that I really, really like. Just so that you know, we will be covering this in detail during session number 3 of the series, where we will walk you through exactly what happens during doping control, what are your rights and what are your responsibilities, and how to, of course, be prepared in case you are selected for doping control. Gianluca, I just want to check with you if you want to add any comments about the testing process or the sample collection itself.
That's all good, thanks.
Perfect. Then moving on to our last question from Natasha Privosnik. Para sport athletes often require various meds related to their impairments. How does the ITA ensure that the use of necessary treatments does not lead to the use of prohibited substances or unintentional anti-doping violations?
Very good question as well. So I will start by saying that, of course, we are very well aware that in para disciplines, there is a natural need to use more medications, prohibited substances, due to the very nature of the different conditions. Therefore, our response at the ITA is that, of course, we have a pool of really strong experts in assessing the different type of diseases or conditions, including for paradisciplines. So this means that if an athlete needs to use a prohibited substance, he or she will need to submit a therapeutic use exemption application, and we will hear more about this in a one other webinar. And so specific experts that have a lot of expertise and knowledge also around para-disciplines will be involved in evaluating the application. And so that's how we ensure a level of fairness for the athletes, especially the para-athletes that need to use specific medication or prohibited substances, but also at the same time, we avoid that there is an abuse or an excessive use of a prohibited substance by an athlete. It's not always easy because, as you say in your question, para-disciplines, they are more complicated, but we rely on very strong experts to do that. And the last point that I'll mention is, as I mentioned earlier, unintentional doping is not treated in the same way as intentional doping. So this will be, of course, taken into account into the discipline process in case an athlete is found to have a positive result. But what's very important to always be reminded is that if an athlete has a therapeutic use exemption, and if there is a positive result for that substance, as long as the results of the sample are consistent with what was authorized in the therapeutic use exemption, an athlete will never be sanctioned because this is clearly a use where the athlete was authorized to use the substance.
Thank you so much, Gianluca. Then actually, let's switch gears slightly for the next question, actually from Afiram. And the question is, what are the key difference between a sanction being imposed for substance use versus violations like tampering or whereabouts failures?
Yeah, so in let's say in short terms, the only real difference could be the term of the sanction. If there is a prohibited substance in the system of the athlete, let's say the basic standard sanction can go up to 4 years. Whilst, for example, for a case of 3 whereabouts failure violations in 12 months, the sanction is up to 2 years. So depending on the specific violation, the maximum level of sanction can be a bit different. But for the rest, the procedure is the same from a results management perspective.
Thank you, Gianluca. Here's actually another one that often, I would say, sparks a good discussion. And the question is, what should happen if a coach is aware that an athlete used a prohibited substance and still lets him compete, and even after the competition then reports the situation? What do you think about this?
Well, first of all, again, as we said even before during the webinar, we always strongly recommend anyone that has any suspect, any information that may constitute an anti-doping rule violation, like is the case here, to report it to us. So the very first recommendation is report it to the ITA, report it to the National Anti-Doping Agency, if it's the case, because this may constitute an anti-doping rule violation. In this case, we could have a case of complicities, like the coach is being complicit to an anti-doping rule violation. But there are also other cases, so there could be a case of administration. So the recommendation is to report, and then what we can say, what happened on our side, because I read the question, if a coach is downplaying the incident, the ITA would be investigating the matter. And so if we have any suspicion that, for example, the coach is lying or anything else, this would be followed up by us.
Thank you, Gianluca. And to wrap up the session, we have time for one more. And there's a question about where can people actually find the list of sanctioned athletes or sanctioned support personnel?
That's a very good question. So I'll start by saying that on the ITA's website, you can find all the sanctions imposed by the ITA on behalf of our partners. And we are trying to centralize this as much as possible. So for all ITA federations or federations working with the ITA, you will find the information on ITA's website. And otherwise, you can also go to the website of your national anti-doping organization to know the list of athletes that are suspended. It is an obligation to publish the sanction other than in special exceptions. And therefore, either the International Federation has its own website where they publish the sanction, or if they have delegated to the ITA, these would appear on the ITA's website.
All right. Well, perfect. Thank you so much, Gianluca. Really great to have you here with us today. Thank you to all the attendees for your questions, for your engagement, your insights. But yeah, especially for you, everyone attending this really important session. If we didn't get to your question today, or if you have further questions in the future, please email us at education@ita.sport. Now, we're also pleased to provide you with some resources for each of these different topics that we have covered today. Also here, well, on your screen, you can see a QR code of the ITA IF Webinar Series Toolkit, which includes the slides and recordings after each live webinar. That's a wrap up for today. A big thank you to all of you for your attention, for your participation, for your time and active participation. We hope that you found this session interesting, valuable, and we'll see you again next week, same time, same channel. Thank you, Gianluca, for being here with us today. But most importantly, thank you to everyone who attended this session. We have the ITA education team. See you next week. Thank you.